Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive on motivation.
Yeah,
I'm betting you're here looking for some, practical tips, maybe a little inspiration to get things moving.
absolutely.
Our source today is a self-improvement piece. It's got a kind of cheesy A to Z structure.
But you see,
Yeah, but trust me, there's some nuggets in there that we can unpack.
definitely.
The goal isn't to follow this A to Z blindly, though, right? It's more about figuring out what works for you.
It's about finding those insights that resonate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this source, it jumps right into the nitty-gritty. It says that sometimes it's actually the negative stuff that kicks us into gear.
Oh, the negative.
Like failing a test, scaring down a pile of debt. Those moments of, ugh, I got to fix this. Relatable.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to start, right? Because we often associate motivation with positive feelings,
Right.
but sometimes it's that sting of discomfort that really gets us moving.
So true. So how do we sustain that momentum, though, once that initial, I got to get out of this mess, feeling fades? The source kind of glosses over that. Any thoughts?
Well, they talk about achieving dreams and believing in yourself.
Okay.
Classic self-help territory.
Sure.
But then it gets a little controversial. It suggests that we avoid negativity and negative people altogether.
Ooh, that's a bold statement.
Oh.
Is it even realistic to build a positivity bubble?
Ah.
And what about the idea of setting realistic goals versus just, thinking happy thoughts? I mean, you can't wish your way to success, right?
Right. Well, there's a balance to strike, isn't there? I mean, avoiding negativity completely isn't always possible.
Yeah,
And sometimes confronting those challenges can actually help us grow.
I see.
It's more about understanding what we can control and focusing our energy there.
Okay.
And this reminds me of the O and the A to Z, where the source talks about having horse sense.
Okay, horse sense. I like
Okay.
it. Break that down for us.
So it's about seeing things both as we want them to be
Okay.
and how they actually are.
Okay.
So it's acknowledging the gap between our aspirations and reality, but not letting that discourage us from aiming high.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's about being grounded in reality, but not limiting our vision.
Right.
Now let's get to the actionable stuff.
Yeah.
G is forgiving more, not just at work, but overall.
Mm.
This ties into motivation in a fascinating way.
Mm.
Do you think giving more can actually fuel our energy?
It's a compelling idea, isn't it? When we contribute to something bigger than ourselves, whether it's a project, a community, or even just helping a friend,
Yeah.
it can create a sense of purpose that drives us forward.
Right. It's almost like effort breeds energy when we're invested in something meaningful.
I like that.
Now, M is for motivation, putting dreams in workflows. And I think that's such a great visual. Instead of just dreaming, we're actually taking steps to make things happen. What's one small step you listening can take to make your goal feel more tangible today?
Oh, I love that. So write it down, tell someone about it, break it into smaller tasks. Those first steps are crucial.
Absolutely.
And speaking of taking action, the source emphasizes both practice and preparation, P and R. These seem like obvious steps, but are they really that different from avoiding procrastination, which was CES?
That's a great question. Is it just semantics, or are there subtle differences between those concepts?
I think there are nuances. Practice and preparation are about actively building skills and setting ourselves up for success.
Right.
Procrastination, on the other hand, is about delaying action despite knowing we need to take it.
Oh,
So it's more of an internal struggle.
it's the difference between being proactive and reactive, I guess.
Yes,
One is about momentum. The other is about overcoming inertia.
precisely. And sometimes the hardest part is just getting started breaking through that initial resistance,
Yeah.
which brings us to one of the more classic motivational tropes.
Okay.
Cue quitters versus winners.
Yeah, that one's a bit cliche, isn't it? Does this black and white thinking actually help, or is it too simplistic for real life?
I think there's a kernel of truth there, but it needs some nuance. Persistence is definitely a key ingredient for success. But there's also wisdom in knowing when to walk away from something that's not working or no longer aligns with our goals.
It's about choosing your battles,
Yeah.
right? Knowing when to push through and when to pivot.
Exactly.
Now, the source contrasts being yourself, Jay, with pleasing everyone as if they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting juxtaposition, isn't it? This is where things get really personal.
Right.
It's about finding that balance between being authentic to ourselves and navigating the expectations of others.
That's a struggle many of us face, for sure. And we'd love to hear your take on it. What does this balance look like for you, listener? Where do you find yourself leaning more towards one side or the other?
Yeah, it's a constant negotiation, isn't it? And finding that sweet spot can be tricky.
It can be.
But that's the beauty of, exploring these ideas.
Yes.
Helps us reflect on our own approach.
Absolutely. Now, the source gets really interesting with the X factor. which it says is about giving that extra effort, not just achieving our own goals, but impacting others along the way.
What's fascinating here is this idea that true motivation goes beyond personal gain.
Okay.
It suggests that we find deeper fulfillment when our efforts contribute to something larger than ourselves.
It's almost like our motivation gets amplified when it's connected to a sense of purpose that extends beyond our own, individual goals.
Exactly. Think about times when you felt most driven and engaged. Was it purely about achieving something for yourself?
Right.
Or is there a larger context, a connection to something beyond your own immediate needs?
That's a great question for you too, listener.
Yeah.
What experiences come to mind for you? What were the driving forces behind those moments of peak motivation?
And as we reflect on these individual experiences, it's interesting to consider the source's final point, why, for you. It emphasizes that motivation isn't generic. It's deeply personal. What works for one person might not work for another.
It's about understanding what makes you tick, what lights your fire, what gets you excited to get out of bed in the morning.
Right.
This whole A to Z thing has really been a framework for exploring those individual nuances, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And, as much as I enjoy dissecting this A to Z, I think the real value lies in the questions it's provoked.
Yeah.
It's challenged us to think critically about these seemingly simple motivational concepts.
And speaking of questions, there's one big one the source left unanswered. What is motivation really? It offered examples, tips, even contrasts, but never landed on a clear definition.
It's a curious omission, isn't it? Almost as if the source assumed we all have a shared understanding of this fundamental concept. But when you think about it, is motivation an emotion, a drive, a skill we can develop, something we find or create?
Right. Is it fueled by internal drive or shaped by external factors? Can we choose to be motivated, or does it just strike us like a bolt of lightning?
Yeah.
The source danced around these deeper questions, leaving us to ponder them ourselves.
And that, I believe, is where the real journey begins.
Okay.
It's in wrestling with these questions, exploring different perspectives, and ultimately defining motivation for ourselves.
So we're turning it over to you, listener. What's your definition of motivation? What does it mean to you personally? How do you cultivate it, sustain it, and leverage it to achieve your goals?
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your takeaways, your burning questions, even your personal definitions of motivation on the show's platform.
Because this deep dive may be over, but your exploration of motivation is just getting started.
Yeah.
And as you continue that exploration,
Yeah.
and remember that motivation isn't a destination, it's a journey.
Yeah, it's a constant evolution, isn't it?
It is. Some days you're firing on all cylinders.
Yep.
Other days it's a struggle to even get started.
Totally.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate those inevitable dips, though? The source didn't really give us a roadmap for that.
Well, it did hint at a few things, though.
Okay.
Remember horse sense?
Mm-hmm.
That idea of accepting reality while still aiming high?
Yeah.
That mindset can be crucial when we're feeling stuck.
Right. It's about recognizing those internal roadblocks without letting them completely derail us.
What other strategies might help? Well, I think self-awareness is key.
Okay.
Paying attention to what energizes us, what drains us, what triggers those I can do this feelings.
Yeah.
Once we understand our personal motivation patterns, we can start to create an environment that supports them.
That makes sense. It's about being proactive, designing our lives in a way that maximizes our motivation potential.
Exactly. And this raises a fascinating question.
Okay.
Can motivation be learned,
Oh.
or is it something we're born with, like a personality trait?
I'm leaning towards a bit of both.
Yeah.
We all have natural inclinations, but I think we can also cultivate our capacity for motivation through practice and intention.
It's like a muscle, right?
Ooh.
The more we use it, the stronger it gets. But just like with physical exercise,
Okay.
we need to find the right kind of workout for our motivation muscles.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on motivation, let's leave our listeners with some key takeaways.
Yeah.
What are some things we want them to remember?
Well, first and foremost, motivation is a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process of self-discovery, experimentation, and adjustment.
And don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. To embrace the messy reality of motivation. It's not always about feeling inspired or having a perfect plan. Sometimes it's about pushing through discomfort, facing challenges head on, and learning from setbacks.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are countless resources, communities, and individuals who can offer support, guidance, and inspiration.
So keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep that motivation flame burning bright.
Until next time, keep diving deep.